What you want is right there on the table for you. You can just take it, okay? You can have what you want, but the other guy will get what he wants too, okay? No way. Forget it. Welcome back, and thank you for wanting to know the facts and the truth. What's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is big. You can't miss it on the news. You can't miss it on college campuses, and you really can't miss it online. But what are the facts? Why is this happening? That's what we're here to answer. Our approach is to examine the major themes and focus on the important events that help you make sense of what's happening today. We care about knowing the truth. We also care about the basic human right to live in peace. We care about ending the suffering. We care about finding justice. And we think you're here because you do too. The only path for us then is to go after the facts and be open to what they show us. Life can be beautiful without hatred, violence, and war, and maybe the way there starts with better understanding each other. Better understanding the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, the history of their conflicts and past peace efforts, and some of the major issues standing in the way of forging real peace. What the Hell is Going On in Gaza is a 9-part series made up of 30 episodes, each designed to help you understand a different but important part of the picture. As part 3 of our series continues, we stay focused on the question, how did we get here? To do that, we'll look back on the significant events that really shape the dynamics of what we're seeing today. Here in episode 13, we'll examine the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, which established a 2-state solution for the region. So let's get into it. A 2-state solution is a term we hear a lot these days, but the concept of separate states for Jews and Palestinians is not new at all. One such plan was proposed in the 1937 Peel Commission report, but the first independent, multinational proposal was made in the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine. It was known as Resolution 181. Resolution 181 proposed to establish a Jewish state, a Palestinian state, and an internationally controlled zone in Jerusalem. The plan also called for economic union between the two states and for the protection of religious and minority rights. As had been the pattern throughout this era, Jewish organizations were willing to work with the United Nations during the development of the partition plan, while Palestinian Arab leadership chose to boycott the process. Resolution 181 was adopted on November 29, 1947. 33 countries voted to approve the plan, and 13 voted against it. Of those 13, nearly all were Muslim nations from the Middle East region or had a colonial history, mostly with the British. Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India. The exceptions were Greece and Cuba. While the United Nations approved Resolution 181, it was rejected by the Palestinian Arabs and neighboring Muslim Arab countries. Azam Pasha, the General Secretary of the Arab League at the time, told an Egyptian newspaper, quote, "Personally, I hope the Jews do not force us into this war because it will be a war of elimination, and it will be a dangerous massacre which history will record similarly to the Mongol massacre or the Wars of the Crusades." This was a tremendous moment for Jews. For the first time in almost 2,000 years, they would have their own nation, and on the land of their forefathers, the Holy Land of Israel. But for Arabs, it was another blow, another failure, so they would reject this offer of a 2-state solution. But why was that? Why was their response in 1948, as it was for so many decades before that, so absolutist? There was one principal reason. The Arabs in Palestine were never interested in a 2-state solution because they rejected the idea of a Jewish state. This fundamental, intransigent position has not changed in 75 years, and it is the singular roadblock to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Let's step back though. Was the UN partition plan fair to Arabs? Even if they were willing to consider the existence of a Jewish state on any terms, of any size, Was the UN plan fair or unfair? At the time the UN was developing its plan, there was some debate about the distribution of land between Jews and Palestinian Arabs. Ultimately, in the area subject to partition, 42% of the land was proposed to be given to the Arabs, 56% to the Jews, and 2% to be administered internationally, even though Arabs represented a majority of the population and owned more of the land at the time than the Jews did. However, we also have to consider the fact that much of the land in the partition plan wasn't owned by either Jews or Arabs. It was the territorial holdings of the Ottoman Empire, then the British Empire. The point is that the percentages we just mentioned don't mean that more land was taken away from Arabs to give to Jews. Consider also that the land the UN partitioned was small compared to the former Ottoman territory that was designated for Arabs. At the end of World War II, Britain and France divided the Arab world into what's now Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey, as well as Israel. In fact, originally, Britain's intent was to divide its mandate territory into an Arab territory covering what's now modern-day Jordan and a Jewish territory covering all of Palestine. Based on the facts that, 1, where land was privately owned, the partition plan conformed to the places where it was owned by Jews. 2, much of the land designated for the Jews was government land, not owned by Arabs. And 3, vast former Ottoman territory in the region was designated only for Arabs. It's difficult to argue that the UN partition plan was unfair to the Arabs. Was the partition plan better for the Jews? It was obviously better than nothing, but still, it was a concession for the Jews to accept it. While they got more land than the Arabs in the partition area, much of it was nearly empty, barren land like the Negev Desert. Also, many cities that were historically important to Jews were not included in the new Jewish state. One of those places, Bethlehem, shown here on Christmas Day before 1920, was home to and accessible to people of many faiths before 1948. And Jerusalem, of course, is the holiest city for Jews, the site of the first and second temples. All that remains of those temples is the Western Wall, known as the Wailing Wall. So again, something was better than nothing, and in that sense, the UN partition plan was better for the Jews. This topic of land, its partitioning by the UN in 1947-48, or frankly any other ways of doing it, is moot, because the Arabs made clear that they would not accept the existence of a Jewish state, no matter what the borders were. When Israel declared its independence in 1948, Arab League General Secretary Azam Pasha said, quote, "We will sweep them into the sea." From the river to the sea was the demand in 1947-48, just as it still is today. The Arab position became clear to the UN very quickly. UN Special Committee on Palestine reported to the Security Council that, quote, "Powerful Arab interests, both inside and outside Palestine, are defying the resolution of the General Assembly and are engaged in a deliberate effort to alter by force the settlement envisaged therein." Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, told the Jaffa Daily newspaper that the Arabs did not intend merely to prevent partition, but, quote, "would continue fighting until the Zionists were annihilated." Another influential Arab voice was that of Izz al-Din al-Qassam. Though he died in 1935, more than a decade before the UN partition plan was proposed, al-Qassam played a significant role in solidifying Arabs' intransigent opposition to Israel. Al-Qassam was a militant Arab leader in the 1930s, forming and leading militias, including the infamous Black Hand, to attack both the British and the Jews in Palestine. Al-Qassam's unwavering commitment to violence on behalf of Palestinian Arabs is why his name is recognizable today as the namesake of the Qassam rockets fired into Israel by Hamas's military wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades. Al-Husseini and al-Qassam were important leaders in the Palestinian Arab strategy of violence against the Jews. They set the stage for Palestinian Arab response to the UN's proposed two-state solution and the long future of violence that would follow, because it was under their leadership that the Palestinian Arabs refused to testify before the Peel Commission until it was too late. It was under their leadership that the Palestinian Arabs boycotted the deliberations that led to the UN partition plan, and it was under their leadership that the path of violence was chosen instead of peace and shared prosperity, time after time. Thank you for continuing to watch our series, What the Hell is Going On in Gaza? We hope you got a better understanding of the history and facts behind the UN's partition plan. If you would like to leave a comment or get in touch, visit our website at www.getthefactsmiddleeast.com. There's a lot more to learn in this series, so we hope you'll keep going. Next up is episode 14, where we'll look at what happened next, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in learning more about the war in Gaza. And remember, where there is no knowledge, there can be no insight.